to a TF Tuesday Interlude. I'm your host, K-Libra, and today I have my guest, Zill.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Yeah.
Nice to be on the pod, long-time listener, second-time guest, I guess.
Yeah, you're here now on my show,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're going to talk about things because that's generally what people expect from here. It's going to be identity death today, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to Zill about this on this episode is because I don't think that his idea of it actually qualifies as identity death, even though he does.
And I think this very strongly, so this is going to be a spicy discussion.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun, and I don't remember all the points, so it's going to be a great refresher, too, because we have talked about this before, but now we should dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And before we continue, I just want to let people know, if you're interested in the content, please check out the Patreon, TFTuesday Pod. That's Patreon/TFTuesday Pod. And also, if you have questions for us, you can, send it to, you can tweet at us, hashtag TFTuesday Pod as well. And like and subscribe and hit bells you can hit. They make noises. It's fun.
It's a lot of fun to hear the bells ring.
Yeah, that is the one thing that maybe YouTube will benefit from if you make, little sound effects that you could toggle on and off.
That would be sick, honestly.
Yeah, satisfying little ringtone. I don't want to give them too many ideas. Fuck.
Well, we should all be thinking about new features, given all of the wonderful features that Twitter is getting right now.
Oh.
So, just real great feature. I love Twitter right now. It's great.
One could argue that the identity of Twitter is dying.
It is indeed dying, and not in a fun way. It is TFing into the detritus of God knows what.
Yeah. But yet you look at it and that's what it was. And isn't it terrifying?
It is kind of terrifying, I gotta admit.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I generally don't like identity death. But you know what? Zill, why do you like identity death? But what is it to you?
Yeah, so I think to kind of take a step back, I'm going to start off with my definition of what I think identity death is, and then I'll kind of explain why my take on it in the way that I like it conforms to that. So when we talk about identity death, one of the things that I think is super important to clarify is what are we talking about when we talk about an identity? Us as people, identity can mean so many different things. It can be the ways you express yourself. It can be the way in which you view yourself. It can be, some people will wrap in their physical traits into their identity. A lot of people group things in personality and likes and dislikes. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm defining identity specifically as your consciousness and your personality. So just to get that out of the way, that's kind of how I'm going to define this.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about identity death, I think a lot of times people see the word death and then they just run in the other direction. The idea of an identity death doesn't have to just be, oh, there was a person here and they have their personality and their consciousness has died and has now been replaced by a completely new thing. That's, I think, how a lot of people view identity death. And to be clear, I have thoughts on that too, but that's not really my particular angle. I like to think of it instead as a Ship of Theseus problem. So if you are having a transformation and your identity is changing in different ways, there's certain things that are being introduced into your personality or consciousness bit by bit over time. At some point, the ship has been replaced with completely new wood, and it's a completely new ship to some degree, but you yourself are also that ship. You've been traveling along slowly being replaced, but you're still the same ship at its core. And that's what I like to think about when I think about identity death, because the idea of having a continuous conscience, basically, that gets gradually replaced with different things over the time while you are still perceiving things, in my mind, it's not actually a death, and I'm doing this in quotations, not that you can see, but it's not a death in the traditional sense. Instead, it's more like a change, as I would, I guess, define it. But for most people, I think people would still broadly see that to some degree as a death, because it's like, where does the old Chip end and the new one begin? And if it is completely replaced, well, then doesn't that mean the old you was killed or died in the process? So that's what I like about identity death. I know that's not like the traditional definition of like death, and frankly, I think that the word is a little bit of a misnomer, but there are people who do really enjoy it from that angle, and I respect that.
Okay, so as you were talking about it, it made me think about that the thing about people is that we are more than the physical body.
Yes.
Because if the physical body was that important, then we would be able to say, oh yes, these people are just fine if they're actually brain dead on the table.
Mm.
You know, they're still having their cells constantly replaced, but that person isn't really there anymore, are they? And so I'm just thinking about like Ship of Theseus doesn't really include consciousness in that. So you talk about like consciousness and identity. So you perceive those as two different things to consider, and
Yes.
So what is the identity to you then? Like what how do you define that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the purposes of like a transformation, if I'm thinking about, for example, myself and I'm undergoing what I would define as an identity death, the identity is, you know, you have certain memories or you have certain desires or likes and dislikes, and those things are the things that are being replaced. And of course, you can do this in different ways and different changes, but, you know, either maybe a light turns on and something has been swapped out, or you start to notice that you like something that you didn't before, and then as time progresses, now it's like, oh, yeah, I like that thing, and that's natural, and I've always liked that thing. So I'm viewing identity through the lens of those things in particular, and how those things are being replaced while still having that consistent stream of conscience.
But you could, so that means you could call back to the time when, oh, I didn't like it at that time, right?
For a time, I think during the like kind of transition state, but maybe by the end you wouldn't be able to.
Maybe.
I go back and forth on it. I can enjoy both.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it also just kind of fits into how memory already works. For the most part, I think that people, because, I mean, we'll see how long we end up living.
Yeah.
How lifespans go and how memory goes with that shit.
Yeah.
But when it comes to remembering things, you know, it's like, oh yeah, I remember when I didn't like this. There's usually at least a feeling like, oh, I don't know exactly when, but I do remember there was a time where I didn't.
Yeah.
And so then it's not really that different from what we already do with memory, and then therefore we're all like all our identities are technically dying, or at least evolving. Is evolution technically a death because you're replacing something? And it's just like now I'm just kind of like trying to figure out, you know, what angle to go at this with, because all right, to create a baseline when we think identity death. Oh, sorry, I'm going to speak for myself. When I think of identity death, it's really just simply let's go with zombies. Super easy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, you know, the vessel, the body, it remains. The person is obviously no longer there. They've been gone. There is nothing left but the impulse, the instinct. It is practically a machine made for consumption and for seeking out more.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a sense, not in a sense, but you're doing that with people sometimes. If you say turn them into a dog, now they are just a dog. They don't remember being anything else but that.
Yes.
So that's like the baseline of identity death. But you seem to take that term and still have like an unbroken stream of consciousness involved in it somehow.
Yes.
So I mean that's not really death.
Well, I mean, under the definition, it kind of is, because to use the example of like a person going to the dog, let's say that the starting point is still, you know, you yourself as a person. The end point is still, you are a dog. You do not remember that you are a person. You do not remember any of that. You don't have any of those desires. You are just a dog. That fits within kind of what I think your definition is of identity death. But what I'm saying kind of that gives it a different flavor is, if you are as that person going through those changes and you're noticing things like shifting, like, you know, like you have these new desires and you're losing the old ones, and you still have that continuous stream of consciousness, at the end you can still just be just a dog. but I don't think that the person in there has like, because there's been a stream of consciousness, I don't think there's like a traditional sense of death. There is a death of the identity, but it's not a death of the individual. And that's, I think, where I kind of come from the angle. Like the former identity and the new identity are wholly different from one another. But the person who has experienced both of those identities is still in there and is still the same person.
Okay, so now the identity and the individual are different.
Yes, I guess that's what I'm saying.
So consciousness and identity are different, and identity differs from the individual.
Yeah, I mean,
because
I know I defined at the beginning that like I'm viewing the identity in parts of like
consciousness.
Your consciousness, yeah, sorry, I keep missaying that. But like if you had a consciousness at the beginning and you have a consciousness at the end, and they're the same one to be clear, but you're experiencing life in a different way, I think that still wraps itself up into being relevant with the idea of identity death.
I suppose it's got that very clear line of usually it's just like, oh, you're replaced or erased.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, and there's like no going back.
Yes.
And that's like where the death part comes out, because death is supposed to be final.
Yeah.
And also abrupt.
I mean, I will push back on that a little bit, and I will say this, I'm not someone who's into the like, oh, like you are like dead, and now there's like something completely separate and new that inhabits that form, like a zombie thing. That's not necessarily the angle that I like. However, I mean, if I can speculate for a moment, I think there are some people who like that in the sense of not viewing death as like a finality type thing. If you like, believe there's something after death, that might be like a comfort to you of like, oh yeah, maybe I have like died in this form, but I've gone somewhere else, and the form, I got to experience the change, and now I have moved on to something else. There could be that appeal, at least on that perspective. And I'm sure there's just other people who just like the idea of ceasing to exist, which, like, you know what, I'm not going to fault them for either, because everything's a lot. But I mean,
fuck. Suicide is the thing.
Yes, it is. Well, I mean, okay, I think we have to talk about that when we talk about like the idea of people being into identity death, because I'm viewing it differently. I'm not viewing it as that kind of a thing, but that is an appeal to certain people, and
Well, yeah, because like you want the pain to stop and things like that generally, or you just want to be better, and like that goes into like a different conversation.
Exactly.
That I actually think is also pretty relevant to a number of people that we've met in the community.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I see where you're coming from, because now it's like a rebirth.
Yeah.
But when you're reborn as something, sometimes you could say it's like that was the old me had died long ago, sort of thing, and people have used that euphemism in like all kinds of stories that don't have a literal change of like the physical brain and body and things like that. But,
if I may bring up another example, actually, because it just reminded me of this. I don't know how familiar you are with Destiny 2.
Not really, no.
Okay. I'm not going to like get into like the lore or anything. Honestly, I don't actually know a lot about Destiny 2, but I do know this one particular thing that's relevant. The characters that you play in Destiny are called Guardians, and the idea behind them is that they were people in the past who died and then were reborn. And the game, I mean, again, I don't play Destiny, so I apologize. Feel free to yell at me if I'm getting this wrong, but basically my understanding of it is the idea is that they're both still the same person, but they don't have the memories or like all the stuff. The personality at its core kind of stays the same. And so obviously that's not really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about identity death, but the idea of, you were this whole person, you then actually died and had a break in conscience or consciousness, but then you're reborn, and then you are still like at your core the same personality, but now you don't have the memories or the other things that influenced you. Maybe that's kind of part of the appeal as well, like that you could be reborn in that way. I guess when you said reborn, that was immediately what I thought of.
The idea of rebirth also is like a second chance.
Yeah.
It's a second chance. It's a better version of you sometimes, sometimes. It also is used as a punishment.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the question of where people will say, "Oh, they're happier as this now." I'm like, how do you can't really say that if that is gone.
Yeah.
If there's nothing to weigh against what came before, how can you possibly be happier? You're not.
Yeah.
You've just removed one thing, put something else in its place.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they're not any more happier than when, you wipe a hard drive and you say, like, oh, yes, the hard drive feels happier now that you've gotten rid of all the viruses, sort of thing.
Yeah. But it's still the same hard drive.
It is the same hard drive, but it was important what was on it before,
yes,
right?
Yes. Absolutely. And, well, there's also the idea of loss being given meaning to some degree, in the sense of, like, the person who was there before was obviously important, had, their own thoughts, desires, etc. And then you have a new person, or someone who has changed into that new person with a new set of, like, thoughts and desires. But perhaps what gives that new state more meaning is the fact that there was another one that has now been lost.
Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking about this. You have a consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and it has been shaped by its experiences.
Yes.
Has developed an identity.
Yes.
Something comes and shifts that.
Yes.
Eventually, the old one is overwritten, but I'm sorry, not overwritten, but it is changed bit by bit, Theseus style.
Yeah.
And it's weird to kind of put that metaphor to thought, because I think you could argue that you can't really ignore what came before to shape a person.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it's not really a death to me still, because in order to get to the point where there was that change, you would still need everything that came before it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I think hangs up a lot of people on the concept is just our conception of what death is. First of all, it varies so wildly from person to person in terms of what that means, what that entails. But then having that attached into, like, a TF context, I think people kind of get their backs up a little bit, because it's like, if you say you're into identity death, people think exactly, it's like either, oh, you're into the idea of suicide, or B, oh, you're into this thing where you're changing, but that's not really death. And I think, like, you can still say there is, like, a death element, but I feel like we almost have to, like, deconnotate some of the connotations that the word death has.
You mean destigmatize?
I mean,
there is a stigma to death.
Yeah.
Generally, we want to live. Generally,
Yeah.
we want to avoid dying.
Mm-hmm.
If we can avoid a thing about us from dying,
Yeah.
that would be good for most of us.
I mean, I agree.
So it's like, I mean, because we can keep getting philosophical about what death means, but then we also have to realize what death means to most of us still matters.
Yes.
And that's going to be the biggest deal when you're going to be talking about what this is supposed to mean.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why last time we did talk about this, I said that we need to have a better vocabulary about the things that we like.
Yes. Well, yeah, and again, I mean, there is a limitation in terms of categorizing all of this as identity death, right? Because, again, I'm saying basically that can mean a lot of different things. And what you're saying is, like, yes, but then we should be using different terminology. To which I'm countering with basically, yes, but this is the terminology that resonates in the community right now. So, yes, we can build new things, and we should, to be clear. I think that's absolutely important. But also, when we have a discussion about these kinds of things, we have to have entry points. And right now, the entry points that we have are things like the big term of identity death.
Yeah, and, well, it's always going to take, like, a few people or, like, the one to really get a concept rolling.
Yeah.
That's how it happens with a lot of things.
That's true. I mean, case in point, think about, like, our last episode where we had Postal Roo on, like, we were talking about Upside Down TF, and he kind of coined the UDTF acronym that then just kind of took off. So it's true, like, sometimes it's just one person does something, and then it can make, like, a big change in terms of how we think about these things.
Yeah, that's really all it is. I suppose people care enough, but it's a mix of things. But I like it more when we can try to express ideas in a more nuanced way, because when Zil first described to me what identity death is and why he likes it, I'm like, that's not the same thing. that doesn't fit like what a death is. This is like more complicated, and also like the more I break it down, the more you're kind of not ever really dead. he never really died.
Yeah,
But we can always split hairs to say, oh yeah, that is certainly a kind of death, and then it's like it feels like both things are true,
mhm.
and it's just it ends up being a philosophical argument, and it comes down to what makes the most sense. And a bit feels over reals after a little while. The more
I
hairs you
guess.
split.
But I think it's important to have these kinds of philosophical discussions because again, like TF as a concept just touches on so many different like philosophical concepts in general. And like this is one that I think this one deserves a lot more discussion in particular. And again, I feel like, how I kind of view it does fall within that terminology, but it doesn't have to necessarily have all of the connotations of like you are dead and like a zombie kind of thing. And like, some of the to get into like I think some of the appeal as well, it's like if you are replacing parts of yourself with different things that you would want yourself to have, there's a comfort in that, right? So like for example, if you're turning into like, I don't know, like a big like monster, just generic monster. Imagine whatever you want to imagine, audience. You're turning into a monster and you are gaining like, a sense of confidence and you have, power, or like you feel like you have power over like your path in life now and stuff like that. And you lose the anxieties you used to have, or you lose the fears that you used to have. And eventually, you are like a different identity in this monster, but you have gained all these things that past you would have wanted. There's an argument to be made that that's appealing to people, and they don't even have to think about, the anxieties and stuff that they had in the past because they don't even remember it. They're just something completely new. There's an appeal to that. And, similarly, some people, like, if they have a difficult life and they want to, like, self-actualize into a new form, whatever that may be, there's also an appeal of not feeling like they were held back by the shitty time they had before the changes. And so I know I've kind of phrased this in a way that sounds like, oh, I don't want to deal with like all this stuff, so I'm just going to like dive into TF. And to be clear, like some people do that, and that's not necessarily the healthiest way to like view these kinds of things. But
well, why is it? No, sorry, I'll put a pin in that on why it's not healthy. But go ahead.
I guess I think that as a concept, it can actually be kind of self-empowering. And again, I know that sounds a little bit contradictory, but if you are imagining yourself going through some sort of identity death type change where you are coming out the other end as like a more self-actualized or a happier person, there is a benefit in enjoying that, in the sense that maybe it's going to plant in you the idea. And again, I'm not talking about physical traits, I guess, so much here, but at least it's maybe planting the idea in you that you now have an understanding of what goals you want to kind of work towards in your own life. And maybe, you don't have to go through an identity death to try and gain some of those things. And I think that can be a good thing.
So as a theme, sort of like being able to push somebody into, I guess, bettering themselves?
Yeah, I think it can be. And I know that, again, because we have all these connotations to death, I think that sometimes we get blinded by seeing the possibilities beyond that. And I think that identity death as a concept can be used for self-betterment. There's definitely people who don't use it that way, but I think it can. And I think that there is enough nuance within that term to at least explore it.
Okay, then two things would have to, the one or two things I think would be most helpful. Either a new kind of term would be best to describe what you're talking about, or the concept would need to be expanded. Because the way I see it, it's usually very blunt.
Yes.
Like, who is so and so? I'm this person now. Like, okay, kind of fucked up to me, because it doesn't really matter if, again, if the thing that came before it isn't there to like contrast, then all you've really done is replaced it. And I mean, I guess the meaning of having the better thing isn't really there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, and I guess, part of this is me viewing it almost as like a trope of a fantasy, is that there's relevance to the viewer and there's relevance to the author, so to speak.
That is right. Yeah, how you're going to interpret anything is going to be up to the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can also posit, like, let's say, for example, I am just thinking about, like, me as I am right now, undergoing a transformation and undergoing an identity death as I've described it and be coming out at the end. Like, how would I feel about that or experience it? I mean, the answer, frankly, is I don't know, because I would be a different person. But I like to think that there would still be some sort of, like, philosophical reflection in the after part if you then told, like, post TF me, like, hey, so you might not remember this, but this is what you were before. This is how you look. This is how you acted, blah, blah, blah. How do you feel about that? Like, what kind of feelings does that evoke? Like, I think you could still engage with that, even just the, like, fantasy idea.
Well, that's almost like, that makes me think of repression. We also just kind of file things away that we talk about. Like, there's repression, and then things just kind of get buried with time.
Yes.
Some things that, I would end up remembering that, are not traumatic, but it's just like, oh yeah, that was a thing. And then before you know it, there's, the older, which is ironically the newer version of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to just rediscover what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly, I don't know, your life opens up again because of something that you remembered with your new perspective, with all the experience that you've gained. I think it's also, like, really tragic when people just are willing to erase a person in the pursuit of, like, being happy, or the idea that somebody else would be happy.
Yes.
But then, like, again, it's like, how are you supposed to even appreciate it? How are you supposed to, like the value is lost to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, then you don't have the person who actually feels the relief of that, who actually feels like, yes, I've made it through this. Look at this version of me that is so much better, that's actually conquered all this, or at least survived it. Sometimes that's all you really need. You need to survive shit. You survived a lot.
Yeah.
But
true.
There's definitely, but you didn't necessarily die either.
No.
And I think that as you keep going, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you're going to be thinking of all the stuff that happened this year. You're going to be thinking about the stuff that happened, 5 years ago, and so on and so forth. Anything that you could remember. And you could argue that it's just like, oh, yes, that's the old me. That's not me anymore. So you have died.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you're still going to have, like, core components to your personality that are going to have been molded by all of your experiences and then some.
Right.
And so that, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of what you already describe when the transformation happens, just faster.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is. I am still basically saying that there's like some
the
sort
transformation,
of
like the transformation itself is an accelerant to all of that.
Yes,
right?
It is, because like there is still a core essentially that I believe is carrying forward, but almost like the things around it are the things that are changing. And like you said, it's like an acceleration of that kind of natural progression that I think we see a lot in life.
Really, just this like character growth.
Yeah, I mean, identity death isn't always character growth. That's the thing, right?
It's not. You're right. You're right about that. It's not always character. It's not always character growth. Actually, you know what? I think growth kind of implies like a betterment or a heightening of something, or building up a thing.
Yeah.
You can grow into being something else. Doesn't necessarily have to be better. Could be weirder.
Could be weirder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. And, I think one of the things that I very much like, I mean, I'm a big fan of like, particularly when we think about like this idea of identity death, something that I do like mirroring it with sometimes is inanimate transformation, because you are becoming an object, and how is that affecting your mind? And if we're talking about like, to touch on one thing we talked, I think, in a prior episode of like indefinite TF, like what if you're turning into an object for an indefinite amount of time, and your perspective changes to mirror, I'm using quotations again, mirror the perspective of an object. So like you would have completely different desires. You wouldn't necessarily remember you were a human, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe you turn back and you still don't have those memories of being a human before. And now you have to like navigate life. Like that I find fascinating and would be interesting. And that might be something that, I think most people would consider a death, but you haven't necessarily grown. You've become something different and weirder, I guess, to your point.
But that also would make me think that you're assuming you get to keep the consciousness. It's also an identity that the person just becomes inanimate, and that's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess like to get into why things I like about inanimate transformation, I do fully believe there's still a consciousness in there, basically.
No, that's fine. I'm splitting hairs because that's this is the kind of way that I wanted to approach it. It's just but what about this? But what about this? I'll split all my hair, and then I have to cut it, and that would make me horribly sad. It's a good conversation to have because again, I was very surprised at his idea of it, and I don't really hear people talk about it a lot that way.
Well, I think also I think people are afraid to talk about it because of the stigmas that we were talking about before. Like, if you say you're into identity death, the first thing that someone is going to think of is oh, so you're into suicide. And it's some people take it that way. I'm not.
Sometimes it's not about imposing it on the self, though.
Yeah, exactly.
We're okay. You're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who would want to experience it.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it a lot as the people who want to do it to others.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of fucked up scenarios where somebody gets erased, and it's just now you're my loyal steed. You are my beastly guard. You are my this and that. And it's that's all they are. They're just a means to an end for someone else. Yeah. They're being used. Sometimes they're being fucking enslaved, all that kind of shit.
It can be very fucked up. And, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people who are into it for other people. And I think that those have much more troubling connotations at times than if someone's thinking about it for themselves. Because I think when you think about it through the lens of, oh, this is something I myself would be interested in doing, you can do the introspection to be oh, okay, these are the reasons why I might be into it. If you're just into it because other people would be undergoing identity death, well, yeah, that has different connotations. And again, look, I'm not yucking anyone's yum. If that's what you're into, that's fine. But you should also think about it from this kind of personal introspection lens. Because I think as someone who's into it for themselves, and because these conversations can be so difficult to navigate because of the stigmas, I've had to think a lot about how do I justify that to myself? How do I justify being into this idea? So if you are into this for it happening to other people, you should similarly do that introspection as to why you yourself like that kind of a thing. Because I guarantee you that the people who are into identity death for themselves have had to do a lot of grappling with that concept. I have not met a person who's into that concept who hasn't thought a lot as to what that means for them and why they're interested in it.
Really? So your experiences have shown you that a lot of people just, they end up putting the thought into it.
Yeah, they do, honestly. Because, again, I think that it is a very stigmatized topic. And, you see it on TF pieces all the time, but you don't see people talking about it. It'll come up maybe in a TF piece, but no one actually talks about that part. They'll talk about oh, I liked, when the paws were changing, or when this happened, or blah, 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 or I liked this interaction. But no one explicitly says oh, I liked it when that person died. They don't talk about it like that, right?
It's because if it's done for the self, it comes off I've seen people make turning themselves into Sonic characters, not amino Cs,
actual Sonic characters.
Yeah, now they are Sonic or Tails or something like that. Yeah. And
it happens a lot with character TF, actually.
Yeah, and it ends at oh, now they're that character. And it's easy to overlook the fact I'm wait a minute, did you just overwrite that living thing with that one? What the fuck? Also, there's two Sonics now. Oh no.
That's gonna cause problems with the canon.
Oh, there's already been two Sonics with the canon, and I was hoping for three with Forces. I have a theory that the Avatar character was supposed to be the Boom Sonic, the Sonic Boom Sonic, which is why he have the little laser tether, which is the thing they had in the Sonic Boom. Yeah. And I swear to fucking God that they should have just done it. They should have had three Sonics in the game, and I would have been there it is. But
they didn't have enough confidence in their idea to follow through.
But this isn't a Sonic podcast where I get to argue with the Sonic fandom.
Okay, but to build on that, I will say, for example, if we're thinking about character TF, let's say I'm going through a character TF and I turn into Shadow at the end. Yes, there is the idea of like, oh, you know, overwriting the person like you were saying, but maybe this shadow who, you know, still has your consciousness at the core, yeah, he's shadow, but maybe he's going to react to things a little bit different because there is that little something, that core of you that is influencing things now, even if it's like, you know, you still have all of Shadow's memories, you have all of Shadow's wants and desires, blah, 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 blah. Maybe it's like slightly different, and maybe that's like a super interesting angle to explore. I don't know, that's like something that like you can do with character TF.
That is something that was explained by somebody that was on my server some time ago. It was Stu.
Oh, yeah.
Uses Stu in a lot of the names. Stu Gron, Stu Raptor.
I don't think I ever interacted with them. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, interesting guy. I did enjoy talking to him. He talked about changes in identity in, like, okay, he gave an example. It's just like, okay, you're Foghorn Leghorn now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're not exactly just Foghorn Leghorn. You're just like, you are a person who is being like strongly influenced. It's almost like it's an instinct that you can't just will away.
Yeah, you can't turn it off.
Yeah, and you just have the compulsion to like make the quips or do like a certain bodily thing, and then maybe you kind of fight it, and maybe you do it, and you're just kind of like, wait, I don't even know why I did that.
Yeah. And
that gets me thinking interesting things like, oh, that's a pretty cool way to like that's a great thought experiment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of what you were doing there. It sounds like that to me.
Exactly.
So you're just like, it's like, I'm Shadow and this and that and these are my motivations. Oh my God, I feel like shit. You know.
Exactly. Or, you know, another way I've seen it explored specifically from like the lens of character TF is like maybe at the beginning you like kind of dissociate and like the like core identity that like you've kind of assumed kind of does things on autopilot for a while, and then you start to like reconnect with yourself, for lack of a better term, and then it starts to become more like the first one where it's like, oh, why am I doing this, blah blah blah. But like at the beginning it's almost like I'm in this new body, I'm gonna let the like, you know, original things run things for a while my mind like grapples with everything that's happened, and then I start to like reintegrate into the character. I've seen that before too, and that can be really interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you seen that in like other people's writing?
Yeah, I've seen it mostly in writing, to be honest, because it's really hard to express that kind of a thing in like a visual medium. I mean, depicting identity death in general, like you can't really do it unless it's like either maybe you're like showing there's like different dialogue, or like you have some sort of demarker to show like, you know, a loss of like the original self. Like obviously with animals, I think this has been talked about before, like, you know, you have like the irises that like go all black or something, and that's kind of like the signifier for it or stuff. But it's generally a lot harder to explore those things in a visual medium versus writing, where like, you know, you can be in the head of a character and you can be talking about things and yada yada yada. So
yeah, and that's one of the big advantages of writing, but also comics and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
If you want to like explore vast swaths of it, then yeah, it would have to be longer form.
Yeah.
But I think it, you know, at least there's potential in like one image or a few images to put a little to shine a bit of light on some of those things.
Exactly. And
that's when it can be pretty cool. And also, there was a thing that you were mentioning about something not being terribly healthy to do with identity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, some people, and, you know, to be honest, I, at points in my past, I think, kind of view it this way. But, like, some people view it as, like, this is a way to escape the person that I am right now because I loathe the person I am right now. And I hate it so much that, you know, this kind of identity death would be preferable because I'm not even worth, you know, the work of putting into myself to make myself this, you know, better version that I'm dying to create, basically. And I understand why people have that perspective. I really do, because I have been in that mental state before myself. But it is not a very healthy way to interact with it, in my opinion. I'm happy to have someone argue with me and prove me wrong about that, but I think that using that trope as a way to, like, just, like, completely discount yourself as a person and not see value inherent in yourself as a person is a mistake. Like many things, you can kind of like empower this concept instead in a different way. And that's, I think, what I like about it and why it's stuck with me, even as many of my other interests have changed as I've explored myself and explored transformation. This is a concept where I think a lot of people, again, have an assumption about it. There are connotations to it, but you can flip it on its head and make it an empowering thing too. And I know that that's not necessarily the way it is always explored, particularly in like writing or fiction, and that's fine. Like, I encourage people to continue to enjoy it in the original way that it has been presented to them. But I think there's a lot that can be mined that can be empowering. And again, I know that sounds like it's almost like a contradiction, but I don't think it is. And I think that based on the way I've kind of formulated my explanation as to how I view it, it's not actually a contradiction. It's just thinking about, as the viewer or author, I can be one way, I can be another. Why am I thinking about these things? Why do I want to be the thing at the end? And then thinking about maybe there's things that I can integrate into my own life to get towards that point. And that is kind of a change. I mean, it's not a death, obviously, but, you can view these tropes in a way that can enhance your life as it is now, is basically what I'm saying.
All right, so you like it for exploring yourself and what could be.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's pretty reasonable. But again, I'll say it's not really identity death. but I also get why it is, because when you want to look at it from a certain angle, yeah, I get it, and even I have to submit to the fact that I am not going to give the same sort of flack or scrutiny when people say that was the old me, the new me is here.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a problem with that in a bunch of other stories. So it's not really very different.
Yeah.
And hell, it fucking happens just as fast sometimes, That's how like climaxes in stories happen.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned climaxes of stories, and maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but one thing that kind of reminds me of, and in my opinion, this game kind of explores the concept really well. In the game Soma by Frictional Games, there is a large exploration about identity, and part of the kind of I'm gonna give away some of the game, so apologies. Spoilers. Part of the game hinges around the fact that the original person had a brain scan that basically gained consciousness on its own, and is now navigating this future where like everything's gone wrong. And at multiple points in the game, you have to make a copy of your conscience. And so there's like consciousness. Sorry. And so you have to you explore this game, and you're kind of confronted with like two of yourselves, both having the same past memories, but inhabiting two different bodies now, and like grappling with what that means philosophically. And the climax of the game basically is you have to do a final copy, and you kind of quote unquote lose the coin toss, in the sense that the consciousness that you have or you are currently experiencing remains in the place you were trying to escape, and the other version or other consciousness gets to go off and escapes. And I forgot where I was going with this, but I think the point I was making was that this is a concept in general where, when we talk about grappling with identity and grappling with like changes to that, and all those kinds of things, there's just a lot of pathways you can go down. And I understand that what I'm all describing doesn't necessarily fit within that term. Maybe there should be a new term, I don't know, but I still think there's value in using the term, and I think that what instead we should maybe think about is expanding the definition of what falls under that umbrella. Because maybe someone will come around tomorrow and make a new term, and it's the thing that I'm kind of talking about, and we'll all be hunky-dory. But as it stands right now, I think there's more benefit towards just expanding what that definition means, and thinking about ways that it can affect the person themselves in a way that can be positive, or at the very least can be an exploration so that you can learn other things about yourself.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I still think there should be a new term, but I think the best step would be to expand the definition at first. Because after a while, if you're going to be considering different aspects or specific traits of, like, oh, this kind of identity, this kind. It's like, oh, there are kinds now. And
Yeah.
as we tend to do, we all really like to name and label things.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it should be expanded on, because otherwise I wouldn't even have had like a different perspective on it if I didn't get to talk with. I only really talked about this with like two different people.
Mhm.
Most people that I speak with, if they want to turn into something, they want to be them in that. They want to experience that.
Yeah.
The very fact that you change your body means you change your tools. The things that you're able to do, that impacts you really fast. So if you are faster, if you are stronger, if you can see, farther, everything like that, suddenly, yeah, you're going to go through some pretty fast changes in your personality,
Oh yeah.
but you are going to be you,
Mhm.
and you want to be around for that.
Yeah.
So, so that's most of the people that I interact with. It's also generally the way I like it
Yeah.
for others, and it's the way I would want it if I'm going to undergo that.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm lucky that it was between Stu and yourself that I had those identity death like conversations,
Mhm.
because they're really just like certain kinds of changes, and they just don't meet that standard for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it's definitely not for everyone, and like if it's not a trope that you yourself are interested in, then that's fine. I understand why you wouldn't. But yeah, I think I'm glad those kind of conversations with myself and Stu have been kind of eye opening, because again, I think that there's just so many different approaches to transformation within the community, and unless you keep an open mind and talk to people about their perspectives, and in particular talk to people who have like put a lot of thought into their positions, we can't really grow as people. Like you need to have those different perspectives and listen to people and really gain a sense as to what makes them tick, so that you can kind of understand these other perspectives that exist within the fandom, and then you can kind of make your own decision as to how you feel about the topic as a whole.
Yeah. And I like that. I really, really do. If I didn't get to talk to people about the things that they like, I wouldn't have even expanded on all the things I enjoy.
Yeah.
Or even just or just liking whole new things. It's just really good to get out of your comfort zones. And speaking for myself, I try to be as patient with people as I can. Also while expressing sometimes like, man, I really don't like that. So what's the deal?
Yeah.
But just with an understanding that, to talk to people about certain things, you got to be willing to not take shit, to just know that, yeah, they're gonna be a little uncomfortable, like just talking about it, because maybe you're gonna look kind of weird or something. There's gonna be something's probably wrong with you, but yeah,
you got to keep an open mind, when you have these conversations.
If it feels like somebody's coming at you in good faith, just kind of accept that, yeah, stuff that you like might make some people uncomfortable. I know that some people that I'm close with are like, oh, I like these things, and they're like, nah, and I'm just like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But they'll hear me out. They'll be like, well, why? And I'll tell them. And sometimes they'll like it, or at least they'll be comfortable with the fact that I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is nice, because then you deepen your friendship and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
And like if you show a willingness to have your beliefs challenged and really do active listening on these kinds of topics, I mean, yeah, like you said, it deepens relationships and it deepens friendships, and it enhances everybody, in my opinion. Like, we are all better off when we approach these discussions with the ability to challenge our own preconceptions and to listen to what the other person is saying, and then formulating an opinion. And of course, there's always going to be bad actors you have to deal with, and that's a completely different story. I'm talking about people who like genuinely want to express themselves and like mean well. When you have those conversations, I think it's better for everyone in the community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And that's community, communication, communing, all that stuff involves, people putting in like at least not equal, but a reasonable amount of effort on different, on each other's parts.
Yeah.
Otherwise, none of that stuff really matters. But I would like it to matter, because first coming to grips with why I find attraction to this kind of stuff it was really difficult, and I felt deeply ashamed, as many people right now do.
Yes.
It's really good to be able to actually talk to people.
Yeah.
Eventually, I think you'll find one or two people that, not only will get you, but will probably, I don't know, just help put your head on, help you put your head on straight, and at least be more comfortable with yourself.
There are good people out there, but you have to be open to being a little bit vulnerable and having yourself challenged a little bit.
Yep, and it's tough, but you try it, you take your chances when you're going to take them. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking about this.
Yeah, me too.
There's just there is more to explore, but yeah, again, I found this to be super interesting with you since it doesn't meet my definition, and it's like, man, everybody thinks they know what this means, but I had no idea exactly what the fuck is going through your head about what this is supposed to mean to you. And I'm like, oh great, so now how is everybody else thinking about this?
Yeah,
if that is your standard, and then of course like somebody else's standard. But yeah, it's good. Absolutely, just talk about it in comments, or or if you're a part of our Patreon, my Patreon, because it's my show now. I'm facilitating this.
You are facilitating this right now. It's true.
That's what's
happening.
This is happening on my hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my space.
In your space.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Thank you for
You're
giving
welcome.
me what I'm owed. Anyway, no, but I'm happy. I'm happy to be part of this. So please, if you're going to be talking about this, if you're in the server, please, talk up a storm. If you want to be part of the server, of course, there are ways to do that. If you would be so kind.
Yeah, you can join the Patreon.
Yeah. So, everybody, thanks for listening. It has been a good talk. There will be more good talks in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, drop your suggestions if you got the ability to do that, or just comment at us. We do like feedback.
We do like feedback. I read all of it, even if I don't always respond. I apologize for that, but I do read everything we get.
Yep, I also read it, and I know.
This episode brought to you by Curiosity Stream.
Oh man, Curiosity. Curiosity could bother to sponsor us.
They could, honestly. Like, come on, Curiosity Stream. My DMs are open. Slide in.
We're a curious topic.
Yeah, give me a cool $5.
Yeah, just for something.
Yeah, I'll sell my Lombax ass for $5. Whatever.
What is a Lombax? Curiosity Stream answers. All right, everybody. See you later. Until next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Keep an open mind. Stay TFE.
No, it's not your show.
I'm going to say it anyways. You can't stop me.
Okay, fine.